So up and back. In this segment, I'm gonna make an announcement about a book I'm writing. Another book I'm writing. Yeah, I know I'm putting the work in. uh, April, my book on hip hop is gonna come out, and hopefully April too, Mindgate will come out at the same time my hip hop book come out. Um, if Mindgate doesn't come out April, it might come out May, but it'll probably be out April. Uh, Usually with Mindgate, it's gonna be available on both Amazon and my website. The book on hip hop is going to be just for the Amazon audience, and the new book I'm going to break down is going to be for my Amazon audience as well. This is going to be a book about classism. All the isms are they're not cool, but they're interesting in the sense that obviously people have wrote about racism, probably the number one ism by far. I don't even know if genderism is a word, but you could just say discrimination based on gender, which is usually because we're in a male society, male versus woman. Usually when you deal with isms, you're going to have the ruling group, and then you're going to have the group that's being victimized or groups that are being victimized, right? So with racism, obviously, for the most part, even though racism could be anything. Racism could be anything, honestly. It could be any culture, any, you know, country, but usually it's always going to be the cultures that are dominant versus the cultures that are not. Now, it doesn't have to be like that, but usually when you see things written on it, it's that way, and largely because sometimes the cultures that are the dominant culture, because, what happens most of the time is that, hey, culture is big, right? You could have someone who may be running stuff, or at least their group, their cultural group, but maybe that group is not as powerful. So then what happens usually with racism is that you get a lot of escapism, where you get someone who would say, all right, let's say Indo-European males or Caucasian males, right? Because that's the dominant power structure in the world. Let's say they would say, oh, well, this one does racism too, or this minority group does racism too. And they try to act like it's fair, like it's even. They don't really realize that if you don't have any power, most of the time, unless you're talking about individual circumstances, it's always going to swing to the people who has power and how they treat the people who don't have power. Whether you like that or not, that's how it is, right? But I don't really want to. But this is not really about racism because when I wrote this book, racism, sexism, discrimination, religion, it's easy. It's easy to break down. It's not easy to fix, but it's easy to break down. And you know why it's not easy to fix? To be honest, it's not easy to fix because it's a silent ism that's been with us since the beginning. And I could guarantee you the other three isms will be solved before this ism is. And this is classism. Now, classism is something that's interesting because it gets people's egos. No question. And when I say gets people's egos, it lights people's egos up. Talk about classism. The first thing that happens is someone throws in one of the other three isms and says those three isms are more important. And that's why classism, I'm not going to say it's the only reason why, but that's one reason why it doesn't get solved, because it doesn't really get understood. Now, when someone may say, what's classism? Here's what classism isn't. Before you understand what classism is, here's what classism isn't. It's been presented to you, right? And you know what? I'm not going to say this is what classism isn't, but it's been presented from a limited scope. Because the way classism is presented to you is rich people versus poor people, right? And this is done intentionally. This is done because the people who are really on top of the power structure need to kind of create diversions or to, create alternative paths that you go down different ways so you don't understand the real road that you're driving in. On. That's the key. So it's presented to you as someone who has more money, yes, definitely more money. You have to have the money first. But then you might have more education as well because you have the money. You might also probably travel more, which would probably go into maybe connections offshore or outside of your country of origin, which would all increase your status. All 100% true. So I'm not going to say it's not true. But here's the big boogeyman that is actually no one is seeing. And it's so funny because sometimes, you get people who are more rebellious into revolution, and even they can't decode it more. To be honest, they can't even decode it sometimes. realistically, the real science behind classes is why it's so hard to understand, because yes, it is what I just described. It could be you have more money, you have more education, you travel more, so you have more international connects. You probably are not as trapped mentally by religion as either. Even though that may not always be the case, but probably you may not be as religious. So all those things go into classism. But it's flawed, and this is the reason why the other three isms, right, usually racism, because I have to admit, people who cry sexism and religious discrimination, they sometimes would say religious discrimination and sexism is just as important or more dangerous than classism, but for the most part, it's not really them. It's really the people who study racism only, who would then just say, well, you could be black and have money and you still not going to be equal to a white person. This is what happens with classism. The people who run the game, run the system, have effectively created buffers, right? Where even sometimes the people who think they're in the ruling power don't even have that, don't even have the real power. They have power compared to someone else who doesn't, because we live in a life of contrast. Of course, everything is about contrast. Somebody's strong until they beat somebody else who may be stronger, right? Or at least in their mind. So then when they get beat by someone stronger, they all of a sudden have insecurities about their own strength. Life's about contrast. So of course, if you're gonna say a rich person versus poor person, right? Yeah, rich person wins. If you say a rich white person versus a black rich person, so a rich white person versus a black rich person, the same money, the white person will win. Yeah, that's true. So then that gets the confusion going in, right? The confusion goes in because then people look at that and say, well, I don't have to study classism because let me study the other three isms. But here's the problem that comes in. Real classism is done over a period of time. That's where everyone is missing for the most part. And yes, some people talk about it when they talk about the Illuminati families and, these rich royalty runs the world, but they don't understand what that means. They really don't understand what that means. It's about having money over a long period of time that goes beyond generations. Because this is actually one of the reasons why I'm writing it, because there's a spiritual connotation to it. What's the spiritual connotation to it? Well, spiritually, if you have a behavior pattern and your ancestors had that behavior pattern and their ancestors had that behavior pattern, you inherit it, right? You inherit it. So this is why sometimes, even when we talk about what's old money versus new money, this is why you could see the difference. If you've been around old money, you can see the difference. If you've been around old money, you can see that it's just a different level of confidence. They don't have to bling, right? Where somebody into new money or a newly rich person would probably want to buy things to prove their status. A newly rich person will be much more materialistic in a lot of ways because they have something to prove. Why? Because their ancestral memory didn't have money. So they then have to go and show everyone how much money they have. That's the difference. There's going to just be certain things you're going to pick up when you have been practicing it over a long period of time. There's a saying that says if you practice something for 10,000 hours, you become an expert. How about if you've been practicing it for 5 or 6 or 7 generations and that's in your DNA? Well, when that's in your DNA, right, it's going to put you at an advantage over someone else who just acquired that power. Not even counting, obviously, the connections you naturally would have. If you go to a country and someone's been living there for all their lives and their family's been living there all their lives, they're going to have certain connections to the local groups. They're going to have connections to people in the country, right? That if you go to a new country, you're not going to have those connections. So, in a lot of ways, the really bad thing that happens is when the elites or the people really running stuff. And now I'm saying elites. I'm not just talking about rich people now. I'm talking about two groups. Either rich people who've had money and power for probably more than 4 generations, or rich people who have acquired a mass amount of knowledge and they're rich as well and they understand how the game is run. Because when people say, well, what do you mean they understand how the game is run? Well, they understand how the game is run because realistically, when you deal with classism, it runs on 3 powers. There's 3 structures to their power. Violence, knowledge, money. You want to say the 4th is time, and you have to have it over a certain period of time, you could do that as well, if you want to. But it's those 3 for the most part. So, for instance, why would John F. Kennedy, well, not John F. Kennedy, Joe Kennedy, right, bootlegger, just like the mob was, why would he elevate himself and the Italians wouldn't? Well, most people don't really realize America is a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant country. So Italians are Catholic. Italians are from Southern Europe. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants is really a British thing or Northern European thing. So when you come over here, the people who fit that prototype are going to have the advantage. This is why, as much as people say Jews and, let's say Italians had power, when you go to certain places in the South, you don't see them. They tend to be more East Coast and West Coast based. Why? The people who tend to be associated with what? Liberals. If that makes any sense. See, when you look at things, when people look at things, they look at things for how it affects them, which is fine, which is based on survival. But if you want to understand how the game is run, how the system is run, you have to look at it from the bigger picture. There's no question. You have to look at it from the bigger picture, because if you don't look at it from the bigger picture, you're never gonna be in this situation where you're gonna free yourself from those chains. Because this is what happens when people understand what I'm talking about. They either choose to play the game, right? And they choose to play the game. It's gonna be two things. That's gonna happen. Either you choose to play it for 2 to 4 generations, and even then, even if you get in the 4 generations, hey, you got families who have money for 12 generations. So you're always gonna be, at a certain at a certain point in the pecking order, right? Or you get an infinite amount of knowledge, which you apply with money, but then you understand how the system is run. So, good example. If you look at the underworld, you look at the mafia, right? If they were going up against a new rich person, all they gotta do is threaten the new rich. All they gotta do against somebody who we consider new rich, quote unquote, threaten them, right? Maybe even kill a family member. That works. All of a sudden, the new rich person says, "I'm rich. I don't have any way to defend myself. Oh man, whatever you want, extort me." That doesn't work against old money. Why? Number 3, violence. Cops. Sometimes the federal agencies, whatever you want to call it, they're the beck and call of the true elites. You can't just bully them saying you're going to kill them. So that whole mafia, Italian, Mexican mafia, Colombian cartel stuff wouldn't work on them, to be honest. In fact, that would be almost suicide going up against them, violence for violence. Because the cops, the establishment, is basically the enforcers. So, in a lot of ways, the person has 3 options. You play 4 generations, and even then, they get still up to them. They gotta let you in. You're still gonna go at the bottom. Number 2, you acquire infinite amount of knowledge, and you apply it with your money. And when I say infinite amount of knowledge, that's why the occult is usually always associated with old money or elites. The reason why the occult is always associated with old money and elites, I mean, there's many reasons why. But in true occultism, there's ways to jump over the bloodline blockages. Meaning, in lower spirituality, it's about blood, right? It's about blood. So the priestesses are born into those systems. Because a lot of the current establishment runs off the occult, and they run off the lower occult, it's based more on blood. So if you're coming in from Southern Europe, if you're coming in from, let's say, Russia, Eastern Europe, notice I'm talking about all Caucasians. I'm not even counting other nationalities. Other nationalities is not even, I was like, of course you're not obviously related to them, but there's people who can't see past white and black, and they don't see the different degrees in the middle. And that's always a sign of a person being, because we're all not born, myself included, in this, obviously, right? But when you understand it, you understand different degrees. When you deal with class, people with class always deal with, or people who understand class. I'm not getting into this bougie stuff or, you know how to eat with a knife and fork. I'm saying when people understand classism, they know it's about stuff in degrees, in the middle. They don't pick these opposite crazy stuff. All black people are poor, all white people are rich, all Chinese people are smart. That's insane. They don't do that, right? They go in the middle. That's why they're able to understand, or at least survive it. Because the thing that happens is, the other 3 isms are linked to classism, to be honest. They're linked to it, for sure. So, what happens is, if you don't understand the classism, the other 3 isms, you only have a superficial understanding of them, and you can't really cure yourself of that. So, this is the reason why I decided to write it, the book. Because, to me, I find that if I see books about classism, it's always all the educated and the rich. And even if they get into, they have money over a certain period of time, it's not telling you how the system works. It's not telling you, no, it's based on those three things: violence, right, knowledge, and money. So when you see a science program dissing magic, right? I mean, the scientists might believe it, but magic was advanced science. Magic was science that was so advanced, the most learned scientists wouldn't understand magic. What better tool for somebody to use? And the reason why they made magic evil is because they understood that if you come from the bottom, the only way to get to their level was magic or advanced science like that. So they made it evil, because that way you be taught about revolution with your guns all day, and then you wonder why 3, 4, 5, 600 years later you're in the same spot. Or worse, you get your revolution, right? You get your revolution, and you become what you pretended you weren't about, which happens all the time. That's why I don't really get. That's why classism is number one. Classism is the number one ism I talk about, because all these people talk all this racist stuff. End of the day, they will do the same thing with power that the people they're talking about would do. So understand classism. You balance that. People love to talk about Atlantis or the concept of Atlantis. You know why Atlantis, the concept, was made? It was made because everyone in that civilization was a deity. And this is not going into if Atlantis was real. Alchemists made the blueprint of Atlantis to show you a civilization, a potential of a civilization where everyone had not access to the knowledge, but everyone did the work. This is not what you see now, where people say, oh, all secrets are going to be revealed. I don't have to get into the cult. I don't have to get into spirituality. I don't got to study. I can just look at YouTube and I'm an occultist. No, it doesn't work like that. We're talking about people who do the work. If everyone does the work, they can transform. That's what Atlantis was. But as long as you have people who don't understand versus people who do understand, you're always going to have that system. And the worst thing is, the reason why classism is hard to understand, because there'll be people who listen to this and say, oh, I could just become a real spiritualist by going to Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, buying books, or clicking on YouTube videos. It doesn't work like that. I actually saw a program where the scientist was ripping astrology. And I'm not even an astrologist, and I said astrologers deserve that. And my friend was like, why? I was like, because anyone who doesn't realize you can't just punch in numbers. You can't just look at random dates. You have to look at the planets as intelligences. And the only way you're going to look at that, the planets like that, is if you transform your consciousness. That actually means doing the yoga. That actually means doing the alchemy. That actually means for a long period of time. It's not just something I could buy an astrology book and I'm kicking it on astrology. It doesn't work like that. So when supposed astronomers, just like supposed spiritualists, when a spiritualist can't rip apart a scientist, or they rip them apart by saying, oh, science can't answer this. They take one question science can't answer and run with it and say, well, I'm not supposed to learn science because of that. Right? Or the astrologer dismisses the scientist and says, oh, well, you're closed-minded. Nah, you probably not doing the work. So when you're not doing the work, somebody else who's only seeing maybe 30% of the pie with one eye, 50%, they can still outdo you because you're seeing nothing. So at the end of the day, the blueprint of Atlantis was everyone does the work, everyone does the transformation. Then civilization changes. Because that's not going to happen anytime soon. You either learn to protect yourself, right? Or you don't have to. You could just sit there and pretend to be, that doesn't exist. But if you want to protect yourself, you have to understand how it works. So that's the reason why I'm writing the book. Hope you enjoy it. Should be here May 17th to 31st. I'm seeing the date. But one of those two dates. Till next time. Peace.